To add in the ability to shoot in our game, we are going to need to make our bullet class. Our bullet class is going to need to have a few of these characteristics that we've identified. It needs to know what location X and Y to appear in. It needs to know what rotation, so it knows where it's pointing. It needs to know when to fire. It needs to know when it's gone off screen, so it's no longer active. So we're going to have to incorporate these features into the bullet class. So I'm going to modify the sprite class, and I'll use that kind of as a template to make the bullet class. So to go into the sprite class right now, select all and copy it. I can add a new tab. My new tab, I will call it bullet. And now I can paste into that tab and change where it says class sprite. I will change it to class bullet. And then I will change the constructor to bullet. And that gives me now the starting point for my bullet class. Now, a lot of the stuff that's in the bullet class we're just going to junk because we really are not going to need that anymore. About the only pieces that we need will be some stuff down here and maybe a little bit of the stuff up here. But the bullet doesn't care whether I'm pushing left or pushing right, so that's going to go away. We can set our bullet so that it starts out at a specific speed, or we can actually make it accelerate a little bit from when it leaves the gun, so it looks kind of cool, even though technically it's probably at max velocity when it leaves the gun, but it's up to you as to how you want to factor that. Now let's see, get rid of that. So now I'm just getting rid of a whole bunch of stuff here that we will then be adding in some new content to it. Now, our bullet isn't going to screen wrap, but our bullet is going to hit the edges of the screen. So I'll change the comment to check for moving out of bounds. We can use 4 lines like this, but it's also possible that we can write the same code as x greater than width, and then we use our computer way of saying or with the 2 pipes, the vertical lines. X is less than 0, or y is greater than height, or y is less than 0. And then if this happens, so if I have run out of bounds, at this point we will set our speed back to 0. We're going to kill its movement. And we'll have to do something else as well in a little bit, but that gives us a starting point. So this one line of code is essentially doing the same as these 4 lines here. So I'm going to get rid of those. See if I can clean up what I'm doing and get it a little bit easier to read, fewer lines on screen. I think that's just going to be a better situation. I find that the maximum speed for the bullet usually needs to be significantly faster than our sprite. Otherwise, we sometimes it causes the appearance of overrunning it when we move after it. And we're like, well, that's kind of lame. So I find 15 is better than 10 in this regard based on the other parameters that we are working with here. Now, it's also, if I'm going to accelerate it, only going 1 per frame is a little bit slow. Accelerating at 2 per frame I find to be just a little bit nicer of a situation. The next thing that we want to do on this is we need to figure out how to set that starting location. Well, to do that, we'll just write a function and call it set start location. Now this function, when we call it, we're going to send it the information that it needs. So we're going to send to the bullet a starting x, a starting y, and a starting rotation. So it knows where it's supposed to be locating this bullet when we set its starting location. So to do that, I will just add in the parameters, and I will say float start x, float start y, comma float start rotation. Once we do that, then we will assign those values. So we'll say x is equal to start x, y is equal to start y, and rotation is equal to start rotation. So when we tell a bullet to start firing or moving, we're going to set its starting location by calling this function and passing to it these three numbers. So we'll pass to it the x of the sprite, the y of the sprite, and the rotation of the sprite. So then when this function gets that data, it's able to set the bullet's properties as well. Now, what is useful when we're doing this is there's kind of two ways that we can go about constructing our document. One is that every time we fire, we can make a brand new bullet. It gets a little unwieldy to keep track of all the bullets on screen, especially if I can fire a whole bunch of them simultaneously. The other method is we can have a pool of ammunition that we will be working with, and we fire one at a time, much like we did with the drops in the catcher game, where we will then keep track of which ones are active, which ones are not, and we will be prevented from using any as long as they are currently active. So to do that, we want to add an additional property to our bullet. And that property is going to be a Boolean value, and it will be called firing. So we will find out, is our bullet currently firing? So I'll go up to the top and say Boolean firing, and then inside my setup, I will give it a value and say firing equals false, because our bullet will start out not firing. So then when I set the location of the bullet, this is where we tell the bullet, okay, now you're firing. And then when the bullet goes off the screen or runs into the enemy, then we'll say, you're not firing anymore. Firing is false. So we will toggle it between those two states. The bullet either is firing or it's not. And if we don't put it in right now, the problem we're going to run into is we'll start the program and our bullet will just shoot off the screen. So we need to, we're using this as a way to put a limit on our bullet, because we don't want our bullet to be updating its position, updating its speed, or doing any of that stuff unless it's firing. So when we set the starting location, we can say firing is equal to true. And then inside our update, we will say, hey, if firing is equal to true, and we're going to do all of the stuff that we wrote here, and encapsulate it in those curly braces. It also means then when the bullet runs off the screen, I'll say firing is equal to false. So the bullet's no longer firing. So we now have it. When we tell the bullet to fire, we'll give it its location and rotation and say now you're firing. the update will say, hey, cool, I'm now firing, so I can update my speed, change my location, move diagonally across the screen based on my angle. But if I hit the edges of the screen, I'll no longer be firing and I'll lose all my speed. Well, that sucks, but oh well, it's got to happen. We will come back to the bullet class after this, and we'll have to add a little bit more in as we discover that there is still some functionality that's a little bit wonked on it. And we will work on improving that, but it's not a game breaker yet. And it's something that we can add it in, but it doesn't really make sense why we're doing it until we see what the problem actually is. And that's what we will add in next. Inside our main file, we are going to add the bullet and add the ability to fire the bullet. So in the beginning, we're going to start out with one bullet, and then we will look at how we may want to implement a larger magazine in our firearm. But if we can get one going, then that's not an insurmountable task. But we don't want to try and implement that before we even can prove to ourselves that we have a single one going. So now I'm going to reference my bullet class, and I will refer to it as B to continue with our kind of simple naming structures here. And B will be a new bullet. Now, I have the keys left, right, up, and down set for movement, though we're not using down anymore because we went to a rotational mode. Or I guess no, it goes backwards, so it's okay. But when I'm doing a keyboard-based game and using the arrow keys to move, I like to use the space bar to fire. So to use the space bar to fire, we need to add in another Boolean for that. So I will just call it space. And space is equal to false. And then we will have to go into our key pressed and key released functions and then assign the key code hunting for it, which is the number 32. So space is the number 32. So we create our Boolean variable, we give it an initial value of false, and then inside our key pressed and key released, we are going to add two more cases. So I will copy one case, and then I will change it from 40 to 32. And then that will be space. And repeat the same thing on my key released. So now we're able to track one more key in our program, and we are using the key code number of 32 because that corresponds to our space bar. We have a bullet. We have the space key. And that means we now need to add in our response to that. So once space is true, then we want something to happen, and then we need to tell our bullet to update and display on screen. So inside the draw function, we're going to say if space, meaning I press the space bar, so now space is true. So if space is true, we're going to tell B dot, and it will be set start location. Now the cool part about processing, because we wrote the class first, we can see that it's trying to code hint and tell me, hey look, I bet you want to use this method, which is part of the bullet class, and it takes these three values as part of it. Okay, cool. So I'll just hit return, it adds it in. Now it's waiting for my first value. The first value I'm going to pass into it is going to be the x value of my sprite. And then I'll go to the next space between commas, and I will add in the y value for my sprite, and then I will add in the rotation of the sprite. So s.x, s.y, s.rotation. So we're now setting that starting location for our bullet object. Can't forget the closing curly brace. And then after that closing curly, before the final closing curly of my draw method. And if you get lost on what closing curly goes with what, put a comment after it, and I will say end draw. So I know that's what that does. Here I can say end space and rectintersect. So if you find matching up your curly braces is torture and agony and it drives you absolutely batty, even if it's even partially batty, even slightly batty, you might want to put in closing comments on each closing curly brace. So I put end of whatever the thing is that it aligns to. And that makes it a little bit easier when you're scanning the code to go, oh yeah, that one lines up with this one. Now I know. So after end of our space curly, but before the end of the draw curly, now I can tell my bullet to update. And I will tell my bullet to display, sorry. I'm in the draw, where I want to tell my bullet to display. So I've added in listening for the space key. If I press the space key, I tell my bullet to set its starting location, and I pass to it the information about the sprite, and then I'm going to tell the bullet to update and the bullet to display. Now if we run this, and look at it, if I press the space bar, you can see the bullet goes. Now we'll also notice that the bullet is, well, same as the sprite because I never updated the display information for what I wanted my bullet to look like. So now that I know the bullet's working, I can change the bullet's visuals and update that. Going into the bullet class, and I can change its width. I'm going to give it a width of, say, 50, a height of, actually, I'll make it shorter than that, a width of 20 and a height of 10. And then I want my bullet to be a nice radioactive green, so it looks like a plasma shot, so I will change my fill color to green. So all I did was change the height and width and color of my bullet inside the bullet class. Run my project again, and now we can see when I fire, it fires. And if I rotate, it fires in that direction. We can see it sticks when it hits the edge of the screen. So it may be once it intersects the edge, not only do we want to kill its speed, but we want to then park it in some place way off screen. Now if you notice, if I keep pressing the space bar frequently, it keeps resetting the bullet. So that's kind of problematic, and that's now one of those things that I mentioned we may have to address back in the bullet class. So we'll have to wander back into the bullet class to figure out how to address it so that the bullet doesn't, once it's firing, we can't refire when it's halfway down the line. We have a little problem going on right now that when we fire, we can keep pulling the bullet right back to the gun if we just keep hitting the space bar. So we need to find a way to disable that part of the process. And that's going to be in the bullet class, where we can work with the bullet. And because the bullet knows whether it's firing or not, we only want to set the location of the bullet when it's not firing. Because if the bullet's already moving, or firing is true, we don't want to be able to reset its location. There's no reason we should set its starting location if the bullet is in motion. So all we have to do is take all of the stuff inside set start location and just wrap it in a conditional and say if firing is equal to false, then we do all of that stuff. Command T to clean up my formatting. So if firing is false, meaning the bullet is parked, then we set its location and set firing equal to true. Now, we've also seen the problem that the bullet, because it was evolved from the sprite, it's appearing on top of the sprite at the start of the game. Kind of ugly. If we don't want that, what we can do with the bullet is we can then go stick it somewhere off screen. So I'm just going to give it a negative y as its beginning value. So when my project loads, the bullet won't be there. Well, the bullet's there, we just won't see it because it's above our screen. So now if I run my project, I don't see a bullet. I can rotate, I press the space bar, and apparently I can now shoot at my target. Now, if we look at the speed of our vehicle, we may need to adjust the speed of our bullet or eliminate this whole acceleration of bullet. We may want to modify the acceleration. Just say, bullet, your speed is max speed the moment you start firing, so you're getting in front of the vehicle. Because I don't like how when I fire, if I'm going fast, I'm almost running over it. So either I need to slow my sprite down, or I need to modify it and just say speed equal to max speed. So I'm not going to delete that. I'm just commenting that out because that's an alternative way of doing things. So now if I run my project and I fire, we can see that as I fire, my bullet is indeed, it accelerates away from me when I am moving at maximum velocity. So I don't have that problem of I shoot and I'm almost on top of it. Now, sometimes you may want to make it so it's more like if it's not an energy weapon, but is a physical kinetic projectile like a bullet, it slows down. So instead of having it speed up like what we were doing, is we could start it out really fast, and over time it slows down as it moves across the screen, and that could be a nice visual touch. And we could play with it, and then we could have a minimum speed, because we don't want the bullet to accidentally get down to 0 while it's on screen. That'd look really stupid. But we could. So these are all the niceties that you can incorporate into your project. You can decide how you want to do it to get the look and the feel of what you are trying to include. So now we have a bullet. The bullet's working. The bullet's moving. If we want to find out if the bullet hits the bad guy and then we make something happen, we end up realizing that we have the knowledge to do that with our rectangle intersect, because the bullet is a rectangle, the enemy is a rectangle, so all we're doing is a rectangle intersect. So we'll just need a different version of this. So instead of taking the sprite, it's going, or instead of taking the sprite, it takes the bullet and the enemy instead of the sprite and the enemy. So we can now create a version that does that as well. To move the bullet completely off the screen, now that we've proven it is indeed stopping, it's ugly when it's doing it, so now that we know we want it to go off screen, now I can just simply say y is equal to minus 100. That should be enough. Unless my artwork is 100 in height, that's enough to park it off screen so we'll never see it again. And I'm going to go from a max speed to a minimum speed because I want to just play with that. So our bullet will start out going really fast, and then it's going to slow down as it works across the screen. It's not a huge dramatic amount, but it will be a little bit. So if my speed is greater than my minimum speed, then we want to take speed and reduce it by, just say, let's say 2. Let's see how that works. And that also means I need to first tell it when it starts working. I want to say speed is equal to, I'll start it out at 20. So if our speed starts at 20, as long as it's above 5, it's going to keep slowing down as it works its way across the screen. And that slows down a little bit too fast. So there's a lot of friction in the air. And I'll try and slow it down by 0.5 instead of 2. And maybe I need, it's kind of fun, it's going fast, and you can see it really slows down, which would make that really tricky if you're shooting at a moving target. Something coming at you, that would be kind of fun. I'm going to have it slow down, I think, even a little bit less dramatic, so it can at least cover most of the screen without looking like it's coming to a halt. But as you can see, we can create these cool effects. Now, another option, instead of having it where your bullet, you can't fire the same bullet until it's off screen, is we add additional bullets into an array, and then we have a firing timer, just like we had our drop timer. And the firing timer controls how frequently I can shoot. Otherwise, if I have 100 bullets and I can fire them all quickly, it starts to look like I'm shooting out a fire hose effect, which visually can be kind of fun, but from a gameplay standpoint, it's pretty lame. To make our bullets intersect the enemy, we need to figure out then we're going to use another version of rectangle intersect. Now, one thing that's kind of nice that we can do when we do this is we don't actually have to give it a separate name. We can just make a second version of this that takes the different elements, and then the program is smart enough to figure that out. So copy that, paste, but now instead of saying sprite and enemy, it will be bullet and enemy. So now we have our two functions that we are working with. We have rectangle intersect. Ooh, oh, there we go. I just missed a return. My guy screwed up. All right. And our rectangle intersect with two intersects, one that takes bullet enemy, one takes sprite enemy. Now if I look up here, we can say, okay, well, here we have our rectangle intersect doing that. What we can do is do a very similar kind of operation, where I can say if rectangle intersect, and this will be our bullet and our enemy. We want something to happen inside there. Do something. So if they intersect, we need to do something. Before we get too fancy for our bridges, what I think would be worth doing is just kind of copying the same thing that we have here, but I'll use a different color. And put it in there, just so we know that the intersect is working. So I will overlay everything with yellow instead of overlaying everything with red. So when the bullet intersects the enemy, we should see it overlay everything with yellow. Okay. Point at the enemy, shoot. We can see where, okay, it's working. We're getting that yellow overlay. So now that we know something is happening, we know that it's working, what we want to do is, the something that we want to do is kill the enemy. And we have to figure out how to do that. So if that intersect returns true, probably what would work best is to then tell the enemy to, to die, or we could use a less harmful word of to respawn, or to go into hibernation, or to go take a break, take a time out. We could be positive and uplifting even if we are shooting at it. That's okay. So we'll say enemy I'm going to use respawn. Oh, but it's not enemy, it's E. Just E. Now, currently the program's underlining respawn with red going, I have no idea what respawn is, because when we did the bullet, we made the function in the bullet of set start location, so then when we were in our main class and used it, it actually helped us auto-complete the code. Because we haven't done anything to the enemy yet, the enemy doesn't know what this respawn is, so the program looks at this and goes, yeah, I think you're in trouble here. You better fix that. So I'm going to underline it, and even puts red at the bottom. The function respawn does not exist. You can say, I know. We're going to put that in now. So that means I can now go into my enemy and we'll write the respawn function. So when we look at the enemy and think about what it needs to do, what respawning will entail is we will probably be resetting all of this information. We'll accept the width and height because that shouldn't need to change, but we'll reset its speed, its rotation, and its x and its y. Those properties of the object that are controlling how it's moving around on screen. So this function doesn't return anything, so it's a void respawn. So inside our curlies, what I can do is I can just now grab what I had before, and I'll copy that, paste it in, copy my speed and rotation, paste that in. So what will happen is if I hit the enemy, essentially what will appear on screen is a new enemy, but it's the same enemy, is going to respawn itself into a new location. Hopefully not on top of the player or sprite. Now, if we run this, if I point at the enemy, fire. All right. Yeah, I'm a really bad shot, and now it's chasing me. Couldn't quite get my angle right. And now we see the enemy moved, and if I can hit it again. Hit it again. And now it. So we're hitting it. But it does seem that we're having some collision issues going on, which I think is based on how the bullet is drawing itself versus how the other objects are drawing. Because the bullet continues through the object as it hits it and keeps on going, theoretically it could hit the object twice. What we really want to do is to set up the bullet so that it has the ability to reset itself, and that would really just be another method of reset. Now, what goes in the reset, we already have that written, which is speed is 0, firing is false, and then the y minus 100. So that's what we are going to put into the reset. And then instead of calling those lines of code, all we have to now call when we run out of bounds is we just say call the reset method. So if we can call the reset method, what that means we can do is we can, when an intersection has occurred, we can tell the enemy to respawn, and we can tell our bullet to reset. So the bullet reset is just move the 3 lines of code that were in there going out of bounds into its own nice, pretty, standalone reset function. So it tidies it up a little bit. And from a coding standpoint, it's when you're doing something where you're setting a bunch of properties of an object, it actually makes sense to put it into its own method or function. That's considered a good practice.